This week, we're talking Tesla. We share our first impressions of the new Model S and its all-new steering yoke, its shifter and touch button, horn, and turn signal controls. Next on Talking Cars. Hey, welcome back. I'm Keith Barry.
I'm Alex Nizick.
And I'm Jake Fisher.
And, we have a very special episode of Talking Cars today because we got a very special car in to talk about. About a week ago, we took delivery of a brand new Tesla Model S. And this is an updated version of Tesla's flagship sedan. The main difference between it, there are a bunch of updates that have happened. We're gonna cover all those in due time, but there's a couple of fundamental ones of how this car is different from all the other cars that have preceded it, pretty much in history, and that is that there's not a steering wheel. There is a steering yoke. It's this kind of like flat-bottomed, non-circular steering device. Yeah, exactly. That's a great word for it. We need the engineers to come in with it.
We're good with geometry.
Thank you. Non-circle. Yeah. It would help a writer too. But anyhow, Alex, you spent a lot of time in this. Tell us about what this thing is.
Yeah, so the Model S traditionally has had a traditional steering wheel, round, as you might expect with any car. And they kind of just came out of the blue and changed it and installed this, what they're calling the yoke. So it kind of resembles what you might expect to find in the cockpit of an airplane, right? It's designed to be held with your hands, on either side of it, and it's pretty much it. You're not really able to hold it in any other way based on the geometry of it and the way it's designed. And unfortunately, there's no way to get a regular steering wheel in the Model S anymore. So this is the only way that the car is going to be sold, at least for the time being. I tried to keep an open mind when I got the car for the first time and, try to find some benefits or whatever. But unfortunately, the benefits seem to be, few.
Yeah, I heard that word "unfortunately" a couple of times. It sounds like you have some opinions on
yeah,
this.
I mean, just ergonomically, it takes a lot of rewiring of your brain to use this thing. You're normally expecting a round device that you're using to pilot the car, and now you're dealing with corners and edges and flat surfaces, or in the case of the top of the yoke, there's nothing there, right? So when you're making maneuvers, you just have to really rewire your brain to use this thing.
Well, there's something there, but it's not circular. It isn't a yoke that has it has sort of like a bar across the top, not the wheel where you would expect to grab.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And the sides of it kind of end in this, little point on each side.
Jake, why did this change take place? I mean, I have some ideas. And just to be clear, we asked Tesla. Tesla hasn't responded to any questions from our reporters since May of 2019. So we tried. So now we have to speculate and also look at some tweets. So Jake, why, other than the fact that we're talking about it for an entire episode of Talking Cars, why else would they do this?
Well, I mean, the thing about Tesla, and I think what people love about Tesla may be the same thing that people hate about them, is they do innovative things. They do things differently. They try things. And really with any kind of innovative company that really pushes, I mean, you go to, any kind of management school or anything, and they're like, well, you got to fail 7 times before you really succeed. And it's really kind of, let's try something new. Let's see how it works. And, if you go back in Elon Musk's, history, I mean, there was many businesses way before Tesla, and sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't. But what it is it's almost like let's bias towards change and see if it works or not. And sometimes things work amazingly well, right? I mean, when this thing came out, when 2012 was the first time we tested a Tesla Model S, it was like, really? No one's going that direction. So many successes. But this bias toward change and trying something different. And I believe Elon Musk himself, I mean, did he tweet saying, round steering wheels are boring? I mean,
he said yet another round wheel is boring. And then gave some other reasons why it would give better visibility of the screen, etc. Yeah.
I mean, certainly when you sit into it, it feels different. You're almost kind of like, you want to, like, anyone who gets in the car, they're like, wow, what is that? That's really interesting. I've never seen any of that. It certainly checks all the boxes there. The problem is that, I mean, look, we've only had the car a week, right? I mean, certainly this is our initial impressions. But what really unfolds is not when you take this car around a racetrack. I mean, they've taken Model S's around Nürburgring and a racetrack. It's pretty cool, I mean, on a highway, it's doing that. You're not doing hand over hand on a highway or a racetrack or, or if you're using, autopilot, for instance. But it's the day-to-day livability. And we're driving these cars around in the, the supermarket parking lot. And it's like, whoa, these things that are just like normal become a chore. I mean, try to do a K-turn or something. I mean, it's like now you got to go and, create a plan on it. Let me think this through before I turn the car around. I got to do all these things. And where'd the turn signal go? It's.
Yeah. That is. So we're going to get to the turn signal in a second. I just kind of want to go what it's like, a sort of a day in the life driving this car. So Alex, I know you encountered some issues just backing out of your driveway, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So backing out of the driveway, obviously a pretty slow maneuver, but it's a 90-degree change from the driveway to the street in front of my house. So you end up having to do a hand over hand, typically, maneuver and spin the wheel all the way around. So simultaneously while checking for traffic coming on both sides of the street. So you really don't have the opportunity or luxury to sit there and stare at the wheel and figure out where your hand is going to land next. So when trying to do this without looking at it, like we mentioned earlier, you might get the flat bottom as you spin it around, or you might end up grabbing a corner. And it just makes it a bit more difficult and tedious to do this. And there was moments where my hand actually slipped off the steering wheel or the yoke rather. And when that happens, there's really nothing to catch, with a round steering wheel. If your hand slips a little bit, or you let the wheel even slide in between your grip, you just can't do that here. So when I lost grip a little bit, it kind of forced the yoke back to the center, which can be a little, concerning. And then there was another instance where coming to our track, exiting off of a 50-mile-an-hour road onto a little side street, when there's traffic behind you, maybe you take that turn a little quicker to not hold up traffic. And same thing, if you have more resistance in the wheel as you're making the turn and you lose a little bit of a grip and the wheel forces back to center, there's nothing for you to catch on the top or really even the bottom because it's flat. So those situations were definitely challenging in my experience so far.
Those grips remind me of because there's only one position that you can really hold your hands on a long highway drive. I drove this thing for a while, and I've got some hand issues from being a writer for over a decade and just some bad genetics. So my grip isn't as strong as it could be, and I've done PT and all that stuff for it. But this thing hurts. My hands were sore because with a normal steering wheel there are a million different little ways that you can adjust your hands on the wheel, but with the yoke, there's kind of one way of gripping it. And those grips themselves, I found them to be, maybe they're ergonomically correct for someone, but they certainly didn't fit my hands. And even with autopilot on, you still need to have a hand on the wheel.
Right.
Even that isn't the answer to this question. Oh, just put on autopilot. No, you still need to just kind of sit there with your hands clenched, and in a way which is not really natural for drivers.
I mean, you talk about a long drive. Autopilot, and I know, Tesla keeps on talking about going to full self-driving, and eventually you won't need a steering wheel. The problem is we're not there yet. So you still need your hands on the wheel. And yeah, I mean, I normally rest my hands, I call it, 10 and 2, in the upper part of the steering wheel. Well, there's nothing there. So you kind of have to hold it like lower down, below, 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, go lower than that, and just not in a very comfortable spot. And you certainly can't rest it on the bottom. But it's like, again, I think I was saying before, it's like, we're not there where you don't need a steering wheel yet. You still need to put your hands on the wheel. Even with autopilot, it still senses your hands on the wheel. So, it's like if, they took the iPhone and they took out the headphone jack before they even had Bluetooth, so you could have wireless. It's like, wait until you could do the wireless stuff before you take the headphone jack out.
Yeah, when you go on to their consumer site, it talks about how, the only thing that really it mentions about the Yoke is that it's to focus on driving. And in my opinion, you're focusing on the wrong parts of driving with this thing most of the time. But, I could see that use case in like maybe 5% of people's driving scenarios where maybe they're on like a twisty road and you really have that grip and you're enjoying. But 95% of the other scenarios is where that statement and that selling point just doesn't really make sense to me.
And what really concerns me is emergency handling. You think about, I used to race cars and autocross and do a lot of track stuff. And I also did a lot of instructing. So I've taught people, how to do things like shuffle steering, as opposed to hand over hand, where you kind of slip the steering wheel through your hands. So you always have a good grip. And you think about autocrossing, people who, have done this, you go in this, coned line parking lot, you're doing a lot of maneuvers. I couldn't even imagine autocrossing this vehicle because you have to actually look down and, choose very carefully where you're gripping. You can't make these quick maneuvers. I mean, maybe at some point you can. I mean, granted, we've had the car for a week, but you kind of have to look down and figure out where you're going to grip this thing rather than quickly be able to make those maneuvers and just grab at the wheel, which is what you really have to do in an emergency situation.
Now, they were able to get a Model S Plaid, the high performance version, around the Nürburgring, and it had the Yoke, but that's a different type of steering input than what you're talking about, or then there's a deer jumped out on the road, I've got to swerve.
Exactly. So in the Nürburgring, I mean, you're going high speed, you're only turning it certain amount of angles, you're not slipping the wheel through your grip. You don't have to turn it that much. On a situation like that, there's not really a control problem. The situation is when you really have to turn very sharply or potentially avoid something very quickly. Again, autocross situation or something like that. That's a lot harder.
So we talked about the wheel itself, but I know that it isn't just the shape of the wheel, it's also the controls around the wheel. And if you look at the wheel up close, you'll see there isn't a turn signal stalk anymore. The headlight buttons, the horn is no longer in the middle of the wheel. These have been replaced by these touch buttons, these flat buttons that are completely indistinguishable by touch from any other surface on the wheel, and that includes the turn signals, which are now a little up and down arrow on the left side of the wheel. And this flummoxed me. I'm sure it must have. I heard, we've had at least 10 people in this car. And it was one of the first kind of, well, okay, I got used to the Yoke, but the turn signals. Jake, what was your experience with these?
I mean, I think I said, as much as I don't like the Yoke, I like their turn signals less, and they actually bothered me more. And like you said, first of all, the capacitive controls in an automotive environment never really work that well, just because you can't feel that depression of a button, that tactical feel.
I felt the depression.
But nicely done. But there's a haptic little click that it gives you, but it doesn't actually push in. So I found myself wanting to put the turn signal on. It didn't actually catch. Often the turn signal would go off when I didn't want it because I would just slip my hand brushing it, and suddenly the wipers are going and the turn signals are going. In fact, I think the turn signals more often went off when I didn't want them when I did want them. But the bigger problem, like you said, they're up and down. Turn signals the turn signal stalk usually goes up and down, but usually you're going left and right. So if you want to go to buttons, maybe left and right would make more sense than up and down. So you got to look down and say, okay, which one of these flat buttons or the flat part of the wheel do I have to hit for the turn signal? But then it gets really worse when you're you're in the supermarket parking lot and you're coming out and you've got the wheel turned. And when you've got it turned, suddenly these buttons that were on the left side of the wheel and the right side of the wheel, the one that was pointing left is now pointing right, and you kind of have to work out on a sheet, which part of the wheel to press before you're signaling, because it's extremely confusing.
I kept feeling like I was failing an IQ test. Like, okay, well, rotate it this way in your mind, and then rotate this part
I think we all failed then.
No, but these are such basic controls in a vehicle that they shouldn't require any thought, any getting used to. That's not even getting to one of the other changes, which is the shifter. Alex, can you kind of walk us through what's up here? Because that's another thing which is missing.
Sure. So the primary mode of shifting the vehicle has been moved from, they had a stalk before on the right side, and now it is in this center screen. So the giant center screen that's in this vehicle on the dashboard. On the left-hand side, there's a thin strip and a little icon of a car, and you basically grab it with your finger and either swipe it up to move forward or down to go in reverse, and then it has a little park button when you have your foot on the brake. And I personally didn't find it too bad to use. It was at least, some credit. It was in a good, reach. It was close to me. It was pretty easy to see for the most part. But yeah, ultimately, it's just another thing to get used to in a car where they've changed, so many things. So that's what you use primarily. And then there is now a second set down below on the console of these more touch capacitive controls that are actually totally blacked out unless you go to touch them. And I believe, Keith, you found that they were pretty, they took a little encouraging to get them to work, a little longer of a press, and they weren't all that responsive. And then the third thing, and probably what people are hearing the most about, is this predictive gear change. Where the car is supposed to be able to use its surroundings and use the sensors and some logic to determine which gear it thinks that you want. So for instance, in my experience, this worked okay when I pulled into a garage or into my driveway and there was a car in front of me. And then the next time I get into the car, it's pretty obvious that I want to go back. But what it can't do is move from reverse to drive or from drive to reverse. So ultimately, in that situation, I use the predictive thing to get out of the driveway into the street, but then I now have to fumble over to the screen and select drive, a different way to continue going forward. So, I think what's there works okay, but it's definitely an incomplete, system as it is. So I think most people would resort probably to the screen.
It was pretty I was pretty impressed that 9 times out of 10, the car knew exactly which, and it'll prompt you. You have to have your foot on the brake in order to engage it, and then you have to tap the gas in order to engage it as well. So you don't necessarily have to worry. But we're going to be putting this through our roll-away test, which we do to every vehicle that we test. We have someone see how easy it is to accidentally put it in the wrong gear and have the vehicle roll away. Something which is nice. You open the door, the car goes into park, and that's always been a thing that Tesla's done, and that's great. There's no risk of it doesn't appear to be a risk of the car deciding which gear to go in when you're getting out of the car. So that's good. Yeah.
And as it stands, it won't even function unless you have your seatbelt on and foot on the brake. That's how you kind of initialize the sequence, and then you tap the brake again to get it to select the gear, and then you can keep driving.
I mean, the thing that, just keeps on kind of bothering me about all that is, they put in all this automation, and it's almost that they've made the primary control so bad that they need to automate it to make it easier. It's like you almost want to use autopilot more just because, holding the steering wheel in a certain way and steering and everything is really, you could automate lane changes on the highway so you don't have to go figure out where the turn signal's on. But I mean, just an experience. So I wound up and I traded cars and, when I was done with it, I gave it to you, Alex. And then I went and I swapped into our Elantra. And like, I got in this Elantra and I'm like, wow, this is nice. This is so stress-free. and I'm like, what's going on here? This is an Elantra. I just got out of this $90,000, unbelievably fast, car, which I should be so excited about. And I was so excited about the driving. And it was just so relaxing to get on an Elantra. And what hit me was this. On the Tesla, all those primary controls, I have to look down. I have to get my eyes off of the road, and I got to go look at the steering wheel to turn the wheel. I got to go look at the steering wheel to figure out where the turn signal is. I got to look down to operate the shifter. I have to look down at all those things. Whereas the Elantra, I could keep my eyes on the road. I could shift. I could turn. I could use the turn signal. I could use the horn. Never are my eyes going off the road. And that was just so much more relaxing than to be constantly okay, where
Multitasking is stressful.
It is. And to one thing is, again, I just want to, emphasize, we haven't lived with this car for a long time. All of our cars are long-term tests. We will spend thousands of miles in this car. And, we will go, not be writing about our final judgment until we really spend much more time in the car. But I cannot anticipate a time where I could do all these things without looking down and keeping my eyes off the road, no matter how used to the systems you are.
Just for comparison's sake, I mean, we had a lot of not great things to say about some recent Mercedes vehicles, which all share a similar control system, and which also have, they have a column shifter, but it's a tiny little stalk, so it feels kind of like where the windshield wiper is supposed to be. It's not a big old column shifter, and that's a Mercedes thing. They're different, and there was a period of time where I kind of I sort of got stuck in a series of, it sounds crazy. I got stuck in a brand new Mercedes, but I did. I know, poor me.
First world problems.
This is beyond that. Yeah, but I got the A-Class, the CLA, the GLA, and at first it was, where the heck is, there are 5 ways to control this, where is it? And then after a couple of weeks, it actually kind of came second nature to me. So I do see that it is possible to. We're in a different situation than people who are going to only be driving this car and buying it, but
I want to separate your Mercedes-Benz experience with this Tesla experience. And with the Mercedes-Benz, yeah, it's different. Yes, there's a learning curve, but I think when you're done, you don't have to look down to operate the shifter. You don't have to look down to operate the steering wheel. You don't have to look down for these things. This car, yes, there's a learning curve, but there is no time that you're going to be able to, take the shifter, right? There's like this little cute icon of a car. It looks really neat, and you can slide it forward and you slide it backwards. I can't imagine any time that you're going to be able to operate that just by feel. There's nothing to feel. It's just somewhere on that screen. There's nothing to hold on to. You're going to have to look down every time.
Yeah, and going back to the wheel, we talked about the flush controls and the touch capacitive controls, and in the Mercedes, Keith, that you're talking about, they do have something similar, right? Those 2 little black chiclet controls that you use with your thumbs, but they are at least they have like a physical form factor to them that you can feel and you can see because it looks different than the wheel. Tesla kind of went a little far with this, and yes, they are the touch capacitive controls, but there's nothing to box them in on the steering wheel or any raised thing to get some feel with your fingers as you're trying to feel for them. So it's just completely flat and flush, and it's not doing them any favors in that regard. So
well, and Alex, you're exactly right. And one step further, those capacitive controls that you're using in Mercedes-Benz, they're not using for the primary driving. They're using for entertainment. They're using for your radio. They're not using it to shift the vehicle. They're not using for a horn. They're not using for something that you might need in an emergency. Like in an emergency situation, you're not going to have to, change your media source, and that's what we generally see capacitive controls for.
And also even something about the form factor of that wheel. We talked of the Yoke. We talked about how the Yoke did make it easier to see this nice big screen, right. Which you shouldn't be looking at anyways. You should be looking out the even bigger screen above it, which is the windshield. But the bottom corner, the bottom right corner of the Yoke blocks a portion of this car's new big touchscreen, and that's where the vehicle controls button is. And for those who haven't driven a Tesla, that's where there are things like some pretty important functions, like where the vents blow, the steering wheel adjuster, these things that have been changed from physical buttons to being put in a touchscreen, which we've seen happen with lots of vehicles, but Tesla's gone a lot further than a lot of other manufacturers. And that button, I can see that someone might want to press while driving. I don't recommend it, but it is hidden by that base of the Yoke. So it just makes it one more thing that you kind of have to, look for. The climate control is right next to it too.
Yeah, the Yoke is quite wide. When I looked at it in pictures, it seemed like, okay, they just chopped the steering or the top of the wheel off, right? And I didn't measure it, so maybe it's just a play on my eyes, but it definitely looks and feels very wide, more so than I expected.
That sounds like a Little House on the Prairie book. The yoke is wide.
It's a rectangle, I believe. Isn't that the technical term? I mean, another thing to think about, I don't know. I mean, depending on how people drive, I mean, certainly, I try to, not hand over hand, but actually shuffle steer through it. But like, if you're ever in a situation where you're accelerating and letting the acceleration straighten out the wheel, and I think we've all been there. It's hard to explain, but the steering wheel's totally turned. You hit the gas, and there's a centering, and all of a sudden the steering wheel spins and strains. Don't do this with this car because it's almost like a baseball bat coming around swinging. And if you try to grab it, you're actually going to get hit. So I mean, this is like when I used to race, I used to drift, and this is something you always do. You let the steering wheel kind of right to center very quickly. That could be a little bit knuckle abrasive if you do that.
That was a complaint. I mean, there have been other squared off steering wheels. I know, my obscure car history. British Leyland came out with this thing called the Quartic steering wheel that they put on a couple of Austin vehicles in the 70s, and it was squared off, and people really hated it, and they changed back very, very quickly. And I'm wondering if one of the most innovative companies to ever exist is going to follow in the pattern of one of the least innovative companies to ever exist. And do we think this yoke is long for this world, or do you think there'll be an option? Do you think? I mean, what do you think is going to happen as more of these vehicles get into the hands, so to speak, of consumers?
This is the clairvoyant time of the show where
Yes.
we're going to predict the future. I mean, I think there's two options. One option is it'll continue, but we'll just see Tesla Model S sales continue to be lower, and it's really just kind of a halo car. I mean, obviously, Tesla is now a Model 3 and a Model Y company, and this is just kind of like a high-end halo. The other option is they would change it, but it's anybody's guess.
And we've seen halo cars in the past that have, the McLaren F1 with the center seating position. That never took off with other vehicles. I mean, there are cars that depart from the norm that sell in the few thousands. And it also is important to, this is a sedan in an SUV world. I mean, the Model X as well, which is the SUV style vehicle, has also come to the yoke. So I'm wondering if they might change it for that as well. But
Well, I think you have to ask, if Tesla really believes in the yoke and feels that it's the way to go, then why, from Tesla's perspective, wouldn't they put it in the 3 and the Y, their most volume selling vehicles? And based on our experience, if they were to do that, their whole mission is to accelerate the, transition to sustainable vehicles, get people in electric vehicles. And if this alienates some people from buying the vehicles because it's not, what people want or expecting, then that might not be a great thing. But it'll be interesting to see, because if they truly believe in it, then, either they don't make it an option or they proliferate it further.
Well, look, I mean, in the management world, I mean, they always talk about, fail often and fail fast, right? So if this is going to be a fail fast, there's two options. Either undo, which, again, I don't know. The other thing is just maybe there'll be Yoke version 2.0, and there'll be a next generation of the Yoke that may improve some of these things. That's another option.
Well, I wonder what our conversation right now would be like if it was only the yoke and all the controls and stuff that we talked about. They still had some button, they still had some stalks, and I know, Jake, you said that was more of your annoyance than the yoke itself, so maybe that could be version 2.0 if we want to speculate.
So, Jake, I get this is a lot of speculation. This is a lot of first impressions. You run the Auto Test Center and the test program. What is going to happen next with this vehicle? Walk us through and walk us through how we get to a final judgment.
Sure. So like every other vehicle that we test, this is actually a purchased vehicle. We own it. We're going to be driving it for thousands of miles. Many of our testers will get into this, and we're going to do a full test draw on it. It's been a while with the Model S, so it's due for an update. They have updated it enough that it's really time for us to have a new score of the vehicle. People like Alex will get into it and start looking at some of the controls. There is a section called everyday usability that we look at. I think some of the things we're talking about now may have some impact in those scores. Also the fact that it, is extremely fast and efficient and roomy. Those things will weigh on it too. And traditionally, the Model S has been very highly rated vehicles. And of course, we do all about 50 tests on the vehicles. It has a lot of standard safety equipment. I expect that'll do very well. We'll also look at our latest reliability information and then have a score on the vehicle. So we got a lot of work to do.
As you can tell, we're going to have a lot more to say about this vehicle. And that's all going to be, as I said, cr.org. We'll be talking about it more in Talking Cars. So if you have any questions, we didn't get to questions this week because we had so many of our own. So you can send your questions, your comments to talkingcars@icloud.com. Thanks for talking cars with us. Thanks for talking Tesla with us. And we'll talk again soon.